Thank you, Chair Cabral, Chair Pacheco, and fellow members of the committee. I'm here, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify and taking me out of order. Today I'm here to testify for H.3240, an act to close a travel loophole in the state conflict of interest law and to provide for greater transparency and accountability regarding travel gifts. The problem and the solution provided by this bill is simple. Massachusetts has strong ethic laws that ban public officials like us from accepting any gifts of substantial value from lobbyists, with the exception of the loophole for lobbyist paid travel. This bill addresses our need for good governance, ethics, and a strong democracy by ensuring that lobbyists and special interest groups are not able to disproportionately influence elected officials through travel gifts. As members of the Massachusetts State House and State Senate, we have an absolute honor of serving our constituents each and every day. When we are elected, we are making a promise to our constituents. I will fight for you and I will represent your voice in the legislature. In Massachusetts, as I stated, we have strong ethics laws because we all agree that legislators should not be engaging in conflict of interest. It is why if we grab lunch, coffee, or dinner with any registered lobbyist in Massachusetts, whether or not they are a personal friend, we must be diligent and make sure that they do not offer a gift worth greater than $50 in 1 year, and this includes splitting the bill or something as small as buying a cup of coffee. These laws are in place to protect the integrity of our public institutions by limiting how money influences our politics. Unfortunately, because of this loophole in the law, this allows lobbyists to give gifts in the form of travel to elected officials that are worth sometimes as much as high as $6,000 per year. This bill does two important things. It prevents registered lobbying groups from paying for elected officials' travel and makes record of travel expenditures to the public, so people we serve know whether their representative has traveled at the expense of lobbying or special interest groups. It is important to close this travel loophole because it is currently being exercised. Legislators have attended conferences on internet regulations with their travel funded by Google and Facebook. They have traveled to meetings about regulating cable TV, paid for by cable operators, and legislators have attended conferences on state gambling policy on the dollar of gaming interests. One may argue related legislation would have or were priorities anyways, but for the sake of our integrity and for our ethics, we ought to remove the pressure to return a favor that comes with expensive travel gifts of thousands of dollars. And this is just a few examples of the travel loophole being used by lobbyists to affect our state policy. So I'm honored to serve my constituents in Somerville, and I know for a fact that each and every one of you are honored to serve your constituents. Our constituents deserve the very best state legislature, and that means making sure that our institutions serve them with the strong ethics and accountability. And as such, I respectfully urge the committee to favorably report H.3340, and I want to thank you all for your time and for hearing out our testimony. Thank you.
So we'll, if she does come up, we'll take her at that point in time. Before we go on for the rest of the testimony on this particular legislation, I think we have a number of folks who have signed up. So we have gone through all the legislators or even all constitutional officers. We had none. Just a quick clarification. I believe when it comes to gifts from lobbyists, you cannot take not even a cup of coffee. That's my understanding of the present law. So if you go to lunch, you pick up your bill. If you go for coffee, you pick up your coffee. That's my understanding. So you can't split bills either, even if it's your friend. So I just wanted to make sure, because I thought it was an implication that we could split the bill. We can't. Not even a cup of coffee. So just for point of clarification on what the existing law right now is on this matter. In terms of travel, we can have a discussion about that another time, because I don't think lobbyists can pay your travel either. So, but anyway, we'll continue on with this. We have now signed up testify on 3240. First person that signed up is Cole Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Cole Harrison. I'm Executive Director of Massachusetts Peace Action. We are in favor of the legislation that Rep. Uyterhoeven introduced. about closing the loophole on lobbyist paid travel. Massachusetts does have strong ethics. I'm sorry, I should introduce my organization. We are a grassroots peace and justice organization with 1,800 dues-paying members in the Commonwealth. We have an online reach of 18,000. We're the state affiliate of Peace Action, which was formed to end nuclear weapons, and we're still working on that, as well as to make the U.S. have a more peaceful foreign policy. Massachusetts has a strong ethics law, but it doesn't when it comes to lobbyist paid travel. Legislators and public officials can take travel paid by lobbyists. They're supposed to disclose it. The disclosure forms are somewhat difficult to access, so partly the bill calls for this information to be stored in an online accessible database, easily searched, so that the public can see what lobbyist paid travel their legislators are taking. And we object when legislators and other public officials take gifts of travel and then vote on bills promoted by the same lobby organizations, which has happened multiple times. It's a clear conflict of interest, and that loophole should be closed. The lobbyists will take legislators or other public officials on a trip. They'll show them a good time. They'll put them up in a 5-star hotel in a beautiful destination, and they'll have the opportunity to form relationships, and they thereby gain an unfair influence over public decision-making. So we urge you to support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, hearing none, we'll move on to the next person.
Anyway, good morning, honorable co-chairs and committee members. I thank you for this opportunity to testify in favor of H.3240, I believe, which addresses the issue of travel funded by clients of lobbyists, as well as the issues of reporting and transparency. The bill focuses on client-funded trips. Now, I'd like to add that trips that are not funded by clients of lobbyists are quite different, and in my view, present no inherent conflict of interest. And these trips constitute the vast majority of trips which legislators report on, which would not be affected by this legislation. The bill also addresses the issue of transparency. The process of checking travel disclosures to see if any travel is paid for by clients of lobbyists, who then submit legislation that legislators will vote on, is exceedingly difficult. I know because some associates and I have spent many hours over many days trying to determine the incidence of client-funded trips, as they're termed, that is, clients of lobbyists. Copies of travel disclosures are maintained officially in at least 3 different locations: the State Ethics Commission, the Senate Clerk's Office, and the House Clerk's Office. Excuse me. Finding travel information in the Ethics Commission office, while staffed by exceedingly helpful people, is painfully slow. Disclosure information is available in pre-computer library fashion in numerous loose leaf folders. Once the would-be researcher identifies documents of interest, a staff member needs to email facsimiles of this information to the researcher. Moreover, not all disclosures appear to be reported to the Ethics Commission. Staff at the Senate Clerk's Office is also very helpful and willing to provide zip archives of disclosures by email. But the process of transcribing the archived disclosures into a usable format is difficult and tedious. The disclosures maintained at the House Clerk's Office, which are quite numerous, are an even larger challenge. Access to these documents is very controlled, and an office staff employee must be present at all times, which is understandable as the documents appear to be the originals. A researcher must then transcribe or take photos of the disclosures. The resulting process is exceedingly difficult and time-consuming for both researchers and for office staff. In order to qualify for the travel exemption, a legislator must simply assert that the travel in question involves, quote, an activity which serves a legitimate public purpose. Even in the most favorable light, this qualification stretches the honor system, but the time-consuming and cumbersome process to access travel disclosures prevents the necessary transparency. A well-organized and searchable online database that includes all disclosures related to travel, as proposed in the bill, would much improve transparency. And the exclusion of travel funded by clients of lobbyists from the travel exemption would eliminate a significant loophole in lobbying regulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Noble. Next is Susan Nicholson.
Thank you, Chairman Cabral and members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak today on behalf of the bill to close the travel loophole. I want to give you two hypothetical examples to illustrate the problem with the current travel exemption. One, suppose a company writes a bill that is very favorable to the company's interests and hires a lobbyist to influence legislators to advance the bill. When the lobbyist meets with a legislator, the lobbyist is actually prevented from handing the legislator a plane ticket worth $2,000 bought with his own funds and say, here, this is for you. I think you'll find the trip very educational. And by the way, we hope you'll co-sponsor our bill. That's strictly forbidden at the moment under the Massachusetts Conflict of Interest law, and for very good reason. State ethics regulations explicitly prohibit legislators from accepting free travel paid for by a lobbyist, that is an individual, even if the proposed travel has educational value and might very well serve a legitimate public purpose. I quote from the travel exemption as currently written: an elected official is not prohibited from accepting payment of travel expenses of substantial value provided by any person other than a public agency or a lobbyist. However, let's vary the example a little bit. Suppose a lobbyist, the individual who's lobbying, has already met with the legislator and, being an obedient fellow, has refrained from handing out any plane tickets. Let's suppose this time it's the president of the company that employs the lobbyist who pays a visit to the very same legislator. And she offers the legislator the very same trip to be underwritten by the company that both she and the legislator know has written the bill, wants the legislator to introduce and very much wants the bill to pass. Now, that second example is perfectly okay under the Ethics Commission's travel exemption, but this doesn't make any sense. The two situations present virtually the same risk that the free travel will influence the legislator's judgment regarding the bill, and furthermore, that will be viewed that way by the public, thus undermining the public's confidence and trust. Consequently, if the first example should be prohibited, and I think everyone would agree it should be, then the second should also. So the travel exemption in its current form badly needs to be fixed. Enter House 3240. House 3240 would prohibit the company paying for the travel in the second example. As described in that example, the company hires a lobbyist. As such, the company would be considered a, quote, client, a technical term under the mass lobbying law, which applies to a company that hires a client. Clients are required to file an annual registration statement with the state secretary. So H.3240 would revise the conflict of interest law to prohibit legislative travel underwritten by organizations registered with the state secretary as clients. If the organization appears on the state secretary's list for any given year as a client, then that organization cannot underwrite legislative travel. As Noble said, our review of most of the large sample of travel disclosures revealed that most trips taken by legislators are not paid for by clients. So most travel would be unaffected by passage of this bill, but the egregious conflicts of interest that we are concerned about would be prohibited. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee members? Hearing none, seeing none. Susan, thank you very much for your testimony. I thought the examples you gave made some clarity to how the law works. So we appreciate it very much. And the clarity is, and I think that's important for those of the general public that are following the hearing, the clarity is that you cannot accept anything from any lobbyist, regardless of the amount. Be a cup of coffee, be a travel ticket, you cannot. That's the clarity. Now, all the other issues that you try to highlight, interesting. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And I also apologize. Of course, I didn't hear what was already testified to, so I apologize if I'm repeating. But I live in Dorchester. I'm a retired local union president, and I care a lot about democracy in our political system. To me, as to I think most people, the undue influence of money in our political system is something that undercuts democracy. And for that reason, I think, and justifiably, we have some pretty strict ethics rules about what legislators can or cannot accept in terms of money from constituents or lobbyists or special interests. But unfortunately, there's a big loophole in our state ethics law that allows, although you can't accept a gift of $50 in cash, as a legislator, you can accept a gift of potentially many thousands of dollars from a party with an interest in legislation at the State House for travel. And, you know, a lot of representatives travel to conferences and cultural events and so on, which are mostly harmless. The bill that we're supporting, that I'm speaking in favor of, would not affect that kind of travel. But travel that's underwritten by parties with an interest in legislation at the State House, or lobbyists or clients of lobbyists, when they pay for travel, not just $50, but sometimes worth many thousands of dollars, this creates an inherent conflict of interest when those same parties come to a legislator and ask them to vote for or against a pending bill. So closing the travel loophole would accomplish a number of things. Although it would leave untouched the relatively benign kind of travel, it would close the loophole that allows lobbyists and clients of lobbyists to fund travel by legislators when they potentially have matters before the State House at the same time. I think this is an obvious reform that would increase transparency and confidence in good government and lessen the influence of money and lobbyists at our State House. So I would urge the committee to recommend favorably this legislation, and for the House and Senate to adopt it. It would be a move toward greater transparency in our government and remove the appearance or the actual presence of conflict of interest at the State House, and increase confidence among our citizens that their legislators are acting out of principle and interest for their constituents and not influenced by money from lobbyists and clients of lobbyists.